Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really interested in the Krays, check out our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London. A direct link for the group is in the YouTube description section. We're a friendly and moderated group which has been running since January 2018, and we have over 19,000 members. Come and give us a try sometime.
Hello again. We continue the story of the Kray twins' early days as they started out on their path to eventual criminal infamy. And thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy it. Mile End has a lot of thieves. Few of them are very good. A big haul is rare, and any thief who has one tries to keep news of it to himself. This is hard. Others are usually involved, and goods have to be disposed of. Somehow, the Kray twins always seem to know in the end. When they did, the thief would get an invitation to the billiard hall, and it would usually be Reggie who discussed their percentage. Thieves are vulnerable, and they would usually pay up more or less what the Kray twins asked. Those who didn't finally wished they had. "You know who I met the other night?" said Reggie Kray to a small man with a squint, after losing a game of snooker to him at the billiard hall. The man was a successful fence from Shepherd's Bush. Old so-and-so from Islington, asking if I wanted 10,000 quid's worth of forged fivers. Just shows how balmy people are. What could I do with all them snide fivers? Even if I could afford them, which I can't. How much he want for them? 30 bob, I think. 30 bob for a snide fiver. What are they like? Looked fine to me, but as you know, that's not my game. And he said he was selling the lot. 3,000 quid, take it or leave it. They played another game of snooker, had a drink, and the man went back to Shepherd's Bush. 2 days later, Reggie received an inquiry about forged £5 notes. It came from a friend of a friend who wanted Reggie to meet a man with a maroon Rover in a pub in Dalston. The man was brisk, well-spoken, and wore a neatly trimmed moustache. After a couple of drinks, he said he might be interested in some goods that Reggie had for sale. Reggie was non-committal. He said the goods weren't his, and he wasn't particularly interested in the idea. The man became more enthusiastic. If these were quality goods, he would be very keen, but he'd have to see them first. Finally, they arranged to meet again the next night at the Terminus Cafe in Mile End Road. Reggie would bring the man with the goods. If they both liked his work, they would split the lot between them. Reggie would bring £1,500. If he were genuinely interested, the man with the moustache should do the same. There used to be a tall, lugubrious thief called Ozzy, who was often around the billiard hall. He had been in prison so many times that his nerve had gone. But he was always glad to be of use to the twins, and the following night, Reggie took him with him to the Terminus Cafe. The maroon Rover was parked outside. Reggie was soon introducing Ozzy to its owner as a master forger. Reggie called for tea and something to eat, paying with a fiver, which was automatically accepted. "One of his?" asked the man with the moustache. "One of his," said Reggie. "Any more I can see?" Ozzy produced a roll of fivers from his back pocket. Examining them, the man said that he couldn't tell them from the real thing, which was hardly surprising, as Reggie had drawn them just that afternoon from the Mile End branch of Barclays Bank. Where were the rest of the notes that were for sale? In Ozzy's flat, off the commercial road. Why not collect them straight away and settle the deal? 5 minutes later, the rover was drawing up outside the tenement where Ozzy lived, with a lady pickpocket from Stoke Newington. This was the crucial point of the operation. The man with the moustache opened the door and started to get out of the car. "No," said Ozzy. "If you don't object, I'd rather bring them down to you. My dear wife knows nothing of my activities. I prefer to keep my business and my private life apart." "Quite right," said Reggie. The man closed the door again. Ozzy walked up the stairs to his flat. As soon as he was there, he rang Limehouse Police Station, gave his address, and asked them to send round a squad car as the man in the flat below was murdering his wife. Three minutes later, he came down the stairs holding a solid-looking brown paper parcel. Reggie had £1,500 in his hand ready to pay. So had the man with the moustache. All that remained to do was to examine the parcel of fivers. The string was stiff and tightly knotted. Inside the first parcel was another, also tightly tied, with string. Reggie had nearly undone it when the squad car came from Limehouse. Klaxon wailing, blue lights flashing. "Christ," said Ozzy, "they've twigged. I'm off," and shoved the parcel into the man's lap. "Don't go without your money," shouted Reggie. "Here's mine," shouted Ozzy, said the man with the moustache, who had already got his car in gear. "Thanks," shouted Ozzy. "See ya!" And the rover hurtled off down the commercial road. By Aldgate Underground, Reggie remembered an important appointment. "Sorry, I gotta go. But remember, I'm trusting you with my share of the notes. You know you can trust me, Reg." When the man with the moustache got back to his large house in Barnet and found that his parcel contained wads of neatly guillotined newspaper, he was angry. But he should have had more sense than turn up at the billiard hall with a loaded shotgun looking for Reggie Kray. Apart from the beating he received when he found him, he was also charged by the police later in the evening when they picked him up, still clutching his loaded gun, from an alley in Whitechapel. He was fined £25 plus costs. Reggie was philosophical about it all when he met Ozzy to collect his £1,500 and tipped the old thief £50 for his part in the affair. He said to Ozzy, "It just goes to show, if people weren't greedy and always thinking about getting something for nothing, they wouldn't come unstuck." There were the old-style Cockney con tricks too. Some of the ways Reggie Kray made money were as ancient and dishonest as the East End itself. There was the Tweedle, for instance, one of the classic Cockney tricks in which the victim was sold a valuable ring at a bargain price. The ring was genuine, and the victim was actually encouraged to have it valued. But there always came a point, just before the money was handed over, where the con man on the Tweedle switched the real ring for a replica. By the time the buyer had discovered his mistake, there was nothing he could do about it. Similarly with the Jargoons, except that here the jewellery sold was fake from the start, and the seller had to rely on faster talking and a quicker sale. Reggie had a way with him. People trusted him, and he could always pick up a few pounds when he needed them from the Jargoons and the Tweedle. But these were small-time rackets, and Reggie Kray had no real wish to be a con man. He knew he lacked the polish and the self-deception to reach the top of this profession. He and Ronnie were agreed that their future would be as robber barons of crime rather than as hard-worked criminals. The 1955 Epsom Spring meeting was a historic one for Gangland and for the twins. Word had got round that the succession stakes of London villainy would shortly be wide open, and the twins felt they had a duty to be there to see what happened. Traditionally, the Epsom races are an annual outing for the villains of London. Back in the days of Darby, Sabini, and his gang, this was where they made their biggest haul of the year. Whichever gang controlled the leading bookmakers' pitches was automatically guaranteed a percentage of the take from every bookie on the course. By the 50s, crime had outgrown the race gangs, but tradition lasted. Anyone who wanted to could still work out the form sheet for London's criminals from what went on during these few days. A smile or a brush-off could still show who was rising or on the way out. A handshake made it clear that an old grudge was forgotten, or a new alliance in the offing. Little went unnoticed. The year 1955 was an exceptional one for London's criminals, and at the spring meeting, attention focused upon two men. One was a thin-faced gentleman called Billy Hill. He was an ex-thief and had spent 17 of his 38 years in places of detention. The other was a big, bombastic man with a large cigar who called himself Jack Spot. He was Jewish, and his real name, Coma. As a young man, he had fought against Mosley's Blackshirts in the East End. Since then, he had organized his Upton Park mob across many of the racetracks in the country. These two men had the contradictory qualities of all natural double acts. Since the war, they had become the Laurel and Hardy of London crime, or, as they like to call themselves, kings of London's underworld. For years, they had been allies. From the mid-40s, Spot with his gang of bruisers, Hill with his following of thieves had been raking over the criminal pickings of London's West End. They had faced little opposition. The pre-war gangsters had grown tired, but the West End was booming. Nightclubs and drinking clubs, prostitution and illicit gambling clubs were producing fortunes. The rich underworld of London was there to be milked by anyone who guaranteed the one thing it still required: peace to prosper and grow fatter still. This Spot and Hill had done for more than 10 profitable years, running the protection, taking their cut on the gambling, and using their power for one main purpose: the survival of the status quo. They had never been a criminal brain at the center of a web of dangerous intrigue, nor were they mafia-style organizers. If other gangs like the Italians or the Maltese wanted a stake in the West End, Spot and Hill would come to an arrangement with them. They acted very much like businessmen, drawing their profits from a discreet monopoly, carefully preserving good relations with the police, and becoming dangerous only when they felt their plastic empire threatened. The worst threat they had to face had come from non-caring tearaways, but these could be dealt with, and it seemed that nothing but old age would stop the coalition of Spot and Hill continuing forever. Then the unthinkable occurred. Spot and Hill fell out. Hill, who is now agreeably retired in a large white villa on the Mediterranean, is inclined to be charitable over what happened. Jack was becoming insecure and a bit jealous of me. He was an older man, you see, and once he got this persecution complex, he was impossible to work with anymore. Spot says he should have shot Hill while he had the chance. Certainly their friendship had already gone very sour by the time the twins took over the billiard hall. Once trouble started between gangland's two kings, the odds were against Spot. The August before, in the so-called Battle of Frith Street, Spot had already been badly cut in the face. He was beginning to get too old for this sort of thing, and if it came to a showdown, Jack Spot would need much younger, tougher allies like the Krays. He had known of them for several years, but had kept clear of them. He could recognize trouble. Now things had changed, and just before the Epsom Spring meeting, Jack Spot had swallowed his pride and called on them at the billiard hall. The twins were most polite, but not effusive. This was their territory. Jack Spot was asking to see them. When he offered them a pitch at Epsom races, they said they'd think about it. It was unheard of for two boys like them to have their own pitch among the country's leading villains, but they were not impressed. We never had liked Spotty, never thought much of him. Finally, they accepted for the hell of it. It might be interesting. Interesting had become a favorite word of Ronnie's. Spot saw to everything. The twins knew nothing about racing. This did not matter. Spotty had found them a good bookmaker to mine. They simply had to stand by his pitch, keeping an eye on their percentage. They also had to keep an eye on Billy Hill. He had the #1 pitch up by the winning post and was surrounded by some interesting friends. There was a black guy who smiled a lot, already one of London's leading hatchetmen, Mad Frankie Fraser. He, like Ronnie Kray, would stop at nothing in a fight. Next to him was Billy Blythe, a wild little man with a conviction for cutting a flying squad officer in the face. And there were others like them. Against men like these, Jack Spot had little but his cigar. 5 years before, the men round him might have made a fight of it. Not now. Several had just returned from prison. For them, nothing was worth the price of going back. Their softness showed. This focused everyone's attention on the twins. Young as they were, they suddenly seemed to be challenging the toughest criminals in London. They also had a chance of seeing just how vulnerable and weak their allies were. But their behavior puzzled everyone. It was hard to tell if it was sheer bravado or stupidity, for the twins seemed to be making a point of totally ignoring their danger. They appeared as unimpressed by Hill's men as by Spot's. Most of the Italian gang were there, intent as usual upon weighing up the odds between the two sides. One of them knew Reggie well enough to feel that he should warn him what he was taking on. This lot mean business. You two must be stark, staring mad to show up here with Spotty. If you want to kill yourselves, there are less painful ways of doing it. But the twins laughed and offered him a drink. When he had gone, Ronnie said, "The way these old men worry, Reg, fair makes you sick." For the rest of that day, the twins kept up their show of insolent indifference for the best-known gangsters in the country. They drank, they entertained their friends, they roared with laughter, they ignored the racing and the betting. Finally, Ronnie yawned and rolled off to sleep. When the day ended, they collected what was owed them, and without bothering to thank Spot, drove off in their van. In fact, of course, the whole performance had been carefully thought out. Their day at the races had been a conscious demonstration of contempt for the older generation of criminals, just as their alliance with Jack Spot had been a determined bid for power. It wasn't that we liked him. We despised him, really. We just turned out with Spotty to show everyone that we was the up-and-coming firm and didn't give a fuck for anyone. Old Spotty understood. Whatever else he may have been, he wasn't stupid. He knew quite well that though we were there in theory as his friends, we meant to end up taking over from him. It was an exciting prospect. the big chance that the twins had both been waiting for. For it to happen, they had to have the one thing that the other criminals at Epsom had seemed scared of: a gang war, a real showdown with the enemy. Excitedly, they prepared for total war, a running fight with the top West End gangsters, where they could use their guns and show how much tougher and more ruthless they and their followers could be than the old gangland kings. Ronnie was in his element, collecting weapons, making plans, haranguing followers at the billiard hall. Fort Valence was prepared as a headquarters. For several days, the twins continued to mobilize. Then came the news that Blythe, Fraser and their friends wanted to fight it out in a pub near Islington. The twins were ready. This was their moment, and that night, London was very near to a wave of gang killing on a scale it had never seen before. For both the twins and their opponents meant business. Once shooting started, it would be hard to stop. The retribution would roll on inevitably. The twins filled their van with arms and a dozen of the best fighters from the billiard hall. Armed to the eyebrows, they drove off to Islington. Ronnie had told them that their hour had come, but the pub was empty. They made themselves at home and waited for the enemy to come. This was a chance to ambush everyone and shoot it out with the advantage of surprise. Still, no one came. Nobody entered the pub that night after the Kray twins, and at closing time they could do nothing except call off the fight and drive away. Ronnie was furious, and for several days he issued challenges and insults to the rival gang. They were entirely ignored. If the twins wanted action, it was soon clear that no one else did. Later they heard that Billy Hill had been alarmed to hear about the challenge and had immediately ordered the battle off. The last thing he wanted now was bloodshed with the Krays and trouble with the law. Nor, when it came to it, did Spot. He too had had a little time to think. It was one thing to make a show at Epsom with the twins, quite another to become involved in a full-scale gang war where people would be killed. Jack Spot had always been a law-abiding monarch. He would far rather abdicate than hang. And so, the big war never came. The twins were carefully edged out from the dramatic role they wanted. For a while at least, the old guard had succeeded in putting them firmly in their places. Thank you very much for watching. That brings this episode to an end. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.